My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 41 years old. For 12 years, I ran a small but successful wilderness outfitting company in western Arkansas, specializing in guided hunts and backcountry expeditions into the Ouachita National Forest. Before that, I served 8 years in the Army, 75th Ranger Regiment. I say this not to brag, but to establish a baseline. I am not a man given to flights of fancy. I am trained to observe, to assess, and to act based on tangible evidence. My life, both in the military and as a guide, has depended on a rational understanding of the world around me. That world ended for me 3 years ago, on a bow hunting trip in a remote stretch of the Caney Creek wilderness. What I'm about to recount is the truth, exactly as I experienced it. The official reports say otherwise. The official reports are a lie. The trip was booked 6 months in advance. A corporate client, a tech executive named Brian, wanted to treat himself and a friend to a real wilderness experience. He was loud on the phone, full of bravado about wanting to bag a trophy buck. His friend, Jake, sounded more subdued, more grounded. The third man was Corey, a former Marine Force recon guy Brian had hired as some kind of personal security, though he framed it as just bringing along a buddy who knew his way around the woods. I met them in Mina, and we drove my truck as far as we could, first on state highways, then on county roads that turned to gravel, and finally onto a barely there Forest Service road that was more of a suggestion than a path. We parked the truck where the road dissolved into a tangle of fallen logs and thick undergrowth. From there, it was a 5-mile hike to the spot I'd chosen. The spot was perfect. It was a small, level clearing in a bowl-shaped valley, flanked by a clear, fast-running creek on one side and a steep, pine-covered ridge on the other. Deer trails crisscrossed the area, and from the sign, it was clear they were using the creek as a primary water source. It was isolated. We hadn't seen another soul since we left the main highway. This was the kind of deep woods where you could go a week without seeing another human being. That was the appeal. It was also the danger. We set up camp. I had a large canvas wall tent that served as our cook tent and communal area. For sleeping, we each had our own one-man backpacking tents, spaced out in a semicircle around the main tent. Corey, the ex-Marine, moved with a quiet efficiency that I recognized and respected. He set up his gear with minimal fuss, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. He was coiled steel. Jake was affable, clearly just happy to be out of the city, helping where he could, asking smart questions.
Brian was the opposite. He was clumsy, noisy, and treated the forest like it was a resort that was failing to meet his standards. He complained about the insects, the humidity, the work of setting up his own tent. I made a mental note to keep a close eye on him. Men like Brian were a liability in the backcountry. The first day and a half were uneventful. The hunting was good. We saw plenty of does and a few young bucks, but Brian was holding out for something bigger. Corey and I spent some time talking, sharing the easy camaraderie of men with similar backgrounds. We talked gear, we talked service, we talked about the quiet of the woods. He was a good man to have at your back. Jake was a quick study, soaking it all in. Brian mostly sat in his camp chair, scrolling on his phone, until he realized he had no signal, at which point his complaints intensified. The first evening was standard. The sun went down, the frogs and cicadas started their nightly chorus, and we sat around the fire pit, a safe distance from the tents, speaking in low tones. It was peaceful. The first sign that something was wrong came on the second night. It wasn't a sound at first. It was the absence of it. Around 10 in the evening, the entire forest went silent. Not quiet, silent. The crickets stopped. The frogs went mute. The gentle rustle of small animals in the undergrowth ceased. It was a deep, profound, and unnatural stillness. It felt like the woods were holding their breath.
I've spent thousands of nights outdoors. I've heard the silence before a storm, the quiet that comes with a sudden drop in temperature. This was different. This was a pressurized silence, heavy and expectant. I was sitting with Corey by the dying embers of the fire. Jake and Brian had already turned in. I saw Corey notice it too. He stopped cleaning his knife, and his head came up, his gaze sweeping the impenetrable black wall of the trees surrounding our little island of firelight. He looked at me, a questioning arch in his eyebrow. I just gave a slow shake of my head. I had no explanation. An apex predator moving through can quiet a forest, a bear or a mountain lion. But this felt different. The silence was absolute, a blanket of dread thrown over the valley. Then came the sound. It came from the ridge to our west, the steep one. It was a single, sharp crack, like a massive tree limb snapping. But it was followed by a grating, grinding noise. It was a wet, heavy sound, like stone being dragged through mud and bone. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed was even deeper than before. Corey looked at me. "Rock slide?" he whispered. I shook my head again. Didn't sound like it. No tumble. Just one grind, then nothing. We sat there for another minute listening. Nothing. The normal sounds of the forest didn't return. The air remained dead and still. "Could be a boar," he offered. "Big one, sharpening its tusks on a rock." It was a plausible explanation. A big, solitary boar could be aggressive and would explain the silence. But the sound hadn't been right. It felt too powerful, too deliberate. "Maybe," I said, not believing it. "Let's turn in. Keep your ears open." We doused the last of the fire, the darkness pressing in immediately. As I walked to my tent, I unholstered the Glock 19 I always carry in the woods and placed it inside the tent next to my sleeping bag. It was mostly for peace of mind. In my experience, there was nothing in the Arkansas woods that a can of bear spray and some common sense couldn't handle. That night, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't so sure. I lay in my tent for over an hour, listening to the oppressive silence before a fitful sleep finally took me. The next morning, the world seemed normal again. The sun was out, the birds were singing, and Brian was already complaining that his air mattress had deflated overnight. The tension from the night before felt distant, like a dream. Corey and I decided to check a game camera I had set up on a major trail about a mile north of camp. I was hoping to get a sense of what was moving through the area and when. When we got to the tree, the camera was gone. I'd strapped it to a thick oak about 10 feet off the ground to keep it out of the reach of curious bears. The straps were still there, but they'd been sliced clean through, not chewed. The camera itself was on the ground 20 feet away. It was smashed to pieces. The tough, weatherproof plastic casing was shattered, not from a fall, but as if it had been crushed in a vise. The lens was broken, and the SD card was missing. I knelt and picked up the fragments. "No bear did this," I said, my voice low. "A bear would have clawed at it, chewed on it. It might have broken it, but not like this." This was deliberate destruction. This was manipulation. Corey was looking up at the tree, then back at the broken camera. Those straps were 10 feet up. A black bear would have to be a hell of a climber to get up there and be precise enough to slice the straps. And what did it do with the card? He ran a hand over his shaved head. "This is weird, Dan." "Yeah," I said, "it is." We stood there for a moment, the broken pieces of plastic in my hand feeling like a warning. When we got back to camp, Brian scoffed at our concern. "A bear, guys. A big, angry bear. Probably smelled the batteries or something. You're being paranoid." He laughed. "Maybe it's Bigfoot. He doesn't like having his picture taken." Jake looked uneasy, glancing between me and Corey, sensing our seriousness. The easy, adventurous mood of the trip was gone, replaced by a thread of genuine fear. That evening, we decided to eat our freeze-dried meals cold, no fire. I didn't want the light to advertise our exact position, nor did I want it to ruin our night vision. We sat in the gathering dusk, the four of us, speaking in whispers. Brian was sullen and resentful, clearly thinking this was all some over-the-top reaction to a broken piece of equipment. As full dark descended, the silence returned. It was just like the night before, only this time we were all awake for it, and the feeling of being watched was a palpable, physical presence. It was a weight on my skin, a prickling at the back of my neck. An hour after sunset, we heard the footsteps. They were heavy, crunching on the leaf litter at the edge of the clearing. They were slow and deliberate, and they were bipedal. I know the sound of a deer walking. I know the 4-beat shuffle of a bear. This was the 1-2 rhythm of a 2-legged creature, but it was too heavy for a man. The steps were ponderous, weighty. Each footfall seemed to press deep into the earth. It was circling the camp, just outside the range of our headlamps, a slow, methodical patrol. Brian's bravado finally cracked. "What is that?" he hissed, his voice trembling. "Is that a person?" "Be quiet," Corey ordered, his hand resting on the pistol on his hip. The footsteps stopped. For a full minute there was only the sound of our own breathing. Then, a new sound. A low, wet sniffing right behind the main tent. It was followed by a heavy, solid pressure against the canvas wall. The fabric groaned, stretching inward. It was a slow, testing push, a clear display of strength and curiosity. That was too much for Brian. He let out a strangled yelp of, "Get away!" Instantly the pressure was gone. There was a soft thump, and the sound of that heavy, 2-legged walk moving away from the camp at a brisk pace, back toward the ridge. It didn't sound like it was running in panic. It sounded like it was retreating tactically. We sat in the dark, hearts hammering. "Nobody goes out alone," I said, my voice tight. "Nobody leaves their tent tonight for any reason. We pack up and we are out of here at first light." There were no arguments, not even from Brian. Later that night, the inevitable happened. Jake's voice came as a strained whisper from his tent. "Dan, I really have to go. I can't hold it." I cursed under my breath. I wasn't going to let him go alone, but the idea of stepping out of my tent made my blood run cold. "Stay there," I whispered back. I unzipped my tent, my Glock in one hand and a high-lumen flashlight in the other. I clicked it on, the powerful beam cutting a sharp, white tunnel through the darkness. Corey was already out of his tent, his own light on, his pistol in a low-ready position. We flanked Jake, walking him just to the edge of the clearing. The woods were a wall of blackness beyond our beams. The silence was still absolute. It felt like we were in a vacuum. Jake did his business quickly, his own fear making him hurry. As we started to walk back toward the tents, I did a slow sweep of the tree line with my flashlight. Just a routine check. My beam traced along the dark shapes of the pines and oaks, and for a split second, it caught something. 2 points of light. They were 100 yards away, up on the ridge, but they were unmistakable. Eyeshine. But it wasn't the green or white eyeshine of a deer or a cat. It was a deep, fiery amber. And they were too high. They had to be 8 or 9 feet off the ground. I froze, holding the beam steady. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out a shape behind the eyes. It was huge, impossibly broad at the shoulders, tapering to a narrow waist. It was a silhouette, dark against the lesser dark of the forest. It was standing upright on 2 legs. It wasn't a bear standing up to get a better look. The proportions were wrong. The shoulders were too wide, the head too small in proportion to the body. As I tried to process the impossible image, it took one step back, out of the beam, and vanished into the darkness. It was as simple as that. One moment it was there, a terrifying violation of the natural order. The next, it was gone. "Did you see that?" I breathed, not taking my eyes off the spot. "See what?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. Corey moved up beside me, his light pointed at the same spot. "I saw the eye shine," he said, his voice grim. "High, too high." We stood there for another 30 seconds, sweeping the ridge with our lights. Nothing. The thing was gone. We got back to our tents, the unspoken terror a living thing between us. Sleep was no longer an option. We just had to wait for the sun, hoping it would come. The dawn was a grim, gray affair. The sky lightened with agonizing slowness. No one had slept. The moment there was enough light to see, we began breaking down camp. We moved with a frantic, silent urgency. Tents were stuffed into bags. Gear was consolidated.
Brian, for the first time, worked without a single complaint, his face pale and his hands shaking so badly he could barely buckle his pack. We were abandoning the large wall tent and anything else non-essential. The plan was simple: get to the truck and get out. We were just finishing up, lashing the last of the gear to our packs, when the attack came. It didn't start with a roar or a charge. It started with the sound of a whistling projectile. Something dark and heavy arced out of the woods and smashed into our camp kitchen setup. The portable gas stove exploded in a shower of twisted metal. It was a rock the size of a bowling ball, thrown with incredible force and terrifying accuracy. We all spun toward the direction it had come from, rifles coming up. And then it stepped out of the trees. The silhouette from the night before was now a creature of flesh and blood, standing in the morning light, and my mind simply refused to accept what I was seeing. It was immense, easily 7.5 feet tall if it stood straight, but it was hunched slightly, its posture predatory. It was covered in thick, matted fur, the color of dark soil and old blood. Its legs were the most jarring part. They were digitigrade, bent backward like a dog's, with powerful, knotted haunches. But it stood and moved on 2 feet. Its arms were grotesquely long, hanging down past its knees, and they were corded with thick, ropey muscle. They ended in huge, 5-fingered hands, black and leathery, tipped with thick, yellowed claws. But the head, God, the head. It was the head of a monstrous wolf or a dire dog, with a long muzzle, lips pulled back in a silent snarl to reveal rows of yellow, dagger-like teeth. Its ears were pointed and alert, swiveling independently to catch every sound. And the eyes, the amber eyes I had seen in the dark, were not the simple, reflective eyes of an animal. They were alight with a terrifying, malevolent intelligence. They scanned us, assessing, calculating. This was not a beast. This was a monster. And it was looking at us the way a man looks at a problem he intends to solve. Time seemed to slow down. Brian made a choked, gargling sound and finally broke from his paralysis. He shouldered his .270, his movements clumsy with terror. The creature's eyes snapped to him. It moved with a speed that defied its bulk. It wasn't a charge. It was a fluid, sideways blur of motion. As Brian tried to bring the rifle to bear, the creature's long arm shot out. It didn't swat the gun away. Its clawed hand closed around the barrel. There was a high-pitched screech of protesting metal, and with a single, contemptuous twist of its wrist, it bent the rifle barrel into a perfect U shape. It tossed the ruined weapon aside as if it were a piece of trash. Brian stared at his useless rifle, then at the creature, and he simply collapsed, folding in on himself on the ground, a whimpering, sobbing heap. The creature paid him no more mind than it would a stone.
It had neutralized the threat, and Brian was no longer a factor. Jake, seeing this, panicked. He screamed and turned to run. It was a fatal mistake. The creature let out a sound then, a deafening explosion of noise that was part wolf howl, part guttural roar, and part something horribly, recognizably human. As Jake scrambled past it, the creature didn't even turn its whole body. It just swung its arm in a casual, backhanded motion. The impact was sickeningly loud, a wet crack that echoed in the silent valley. Jake was thrown through the air like a rag doll, slamming into the trunk of a thick pine tree 15 feet away. He slid to the ground and didn't move. Corey was already firing. The Marine in him had taken over. His .30-06 boomed, the shots controlled and aimed. I saw the rounds strike the creature's chest and shoulder. They hit with heavy, meaty thuds. The fur flew, and dark blood welled up. The creature roared, a sound of pure pain and fury this time, and stumbled back a step. But it didn't go down. It shook its massive head and its intelligent, hateful eyes fixed on Corey. It recognized him as the primary threat. I was firing too, my own .308 lever action snapping rounds as fast as I could work the action. I was aiming for the head, for the neck, for the center mass of that impossibly vital thing. But it was so fast. It used the trees for cover, moving between them with a terrifying agility, its strange, backward-jointed legs propelling it in bursts of speed. It was flanking us. It was thinking. It was hunting. It ignored the sobbing wreck of Brian and the still form of Jake and focused all its ferocity on me and Corey. Another rock came flying from its position behind an oak, this one smaller but just as fast. It slammed into the ground a foot from my head, spraying dirt and pebbles into my face. I dove to the side, rolling behind a fallen log. The move saved my life, but took me out of the fight for a critical second. In that second, the creature rushed Corey. He got one more shot off, a desperate close-range blast that tore into the thing's abdomen. It bellowed and fell upon him. I can't unsee what happened next. I will see it every night for the rest of my life. The creature was on him, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. Corey fought back. He was a Marine. He fought with his knife, with his hands, with everything he had. But it was like a man fighting a piece of industrial machinery. I saw its long arms rise and fall, heard the terrible sounds. I pushed myself up from behind the log, my rifle to my shoulder, my vision tunneled, my hearing reduced to a dull roar. And then I saw my shot. In its frenzy, the creature had its back to me. It was bent over Corey, its massive canine head and thick neck exposed. My training took over. All the years of drills, all the hours on the range.
Breathe out, steady the crosshairs, squeeze the trigger.
The .308 round is a powerful thing. I had placed the shot perfectly at the base of the skull, where the spine meets the brainstem. The shot every sniper dreams of. The impact was immediate and dramatic. The creature let out a shriek, a high-pitched, piercing sound of agony that was utterly different from its roars of rage. It was a sound of pure, neurological damage. It convulsed, its whole body seizing, and it threw itself backward, off of Corey. It staggered to its feet, one hand coming up to clutch the back of its bleeding head. It turned, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. It looked directly at me. One of its amber eyes was now a ruined, bloody mess, but the other one burned with a focused, undiluted hatred that was more terrifying than any physical violence. It stared at me for a long second, a promise of future vengeance in that single, malevolent eye. Then, it did something I never would have predicted. It turned and fled. It didn't run like a panicked animal. It stumbled, limped, and crashed its way back into the dark woods of the ridge, its wounded shriek fading into the distance. It was retreating, wounded, but alive. The sudden silence was deafening. It was broken only by my own ragged gasps for air and Brian's low, hysterical moans. I scrambled over to Corey. I didn't need to check for a pulse. He was gone. The creature had torn him apart. He had died fighting, his knife still clutched in his hand, buried to the hilt in the creature's thigh. A futile, heroic last act. I looked over at Jake. He was lying in a broken heap at the base of the tree. I ran to him, my medic training kicking in. He was alive, barely. His breathing was a shallow, gurgling rattle. I could see the unnatural angle of his neck and spine. He was internally bleeding, his back likely broken. A cold, sharp clarity cut through my shock. We had to get out. Now. That thing was wounded, not dead. It could come back. It could have others of its kind nearby. Staying here was a death sentence. I looked at Brian. He was useless, rocking back and forth, staring at nothing. "Brian," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Get up! Get the satellite phone!" He didn't respond. I ran over, grabbed him by the collar of his expensive jacket, and hauled him to his feet. I slapped him hard. "Get the phone, now! We are leaving!" The shock of the slap seemed to break through his hysteria. He nodded dumbly and began fumbling in his pack. I went back to Jake. I couldn't carry him and my rifle. I made a brutal calculation. My rifle was my only defense if that thing came back. But Jake would die for sure if I left him. I slung the rifle over my back, grabbed Corey's pack, it had the med kit, and then I bent down and hauled Jake over my shoulders in a fireman's carry. He was heavy, a dead weight, and a groan of pain escaped his lips. "Sorry, buddy," I muttered. "Hang on." I started moving, half stumbling toward the trail that would lead us back to the truck. "Brian, move!" I shouted over my shoulder. He was fumbling with the sat phone. "Leave it, just come on." He finally dropped the phone and scrambled after me, his pack abandoned, carrying nothing. The 5-mile hike back was a special kind of hell. Every shadow seemed to hold a tall, broad-shouldered shape. Every snapped twig was the sound of its backward-jointed legs. Jake's weight was crushing, my muscles screaming in protest. Brian stumbled along behind me, sometimes crying, sometimes muttering to himself. I didn't stop, didn't slow down. I was running on pure adrenaline and the primal fear of being pursued by something that should not exist. After what felt like an eternity, we broke through the trees and saw the end of the Forest Service road. We saw my truck. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees buckle. We were safe. I stumbled the last few yards, my lungs burning, and gently lowered Jake to the ground beside the passenger door. I reached for the handle, and then I saw it. The front tire was flat. I walked around the truck. The other front tire was flat. Both rear tires were flat. They hadn't just been punctured. They had been slashed. 3 long, deep gashes in the sidewall of each one. Claws. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The creature had been here. Sometime in the last 3 days, it had found our truck. It knew we would try to escape this way. It had understood what the truck was, and it had disabled it. The intelligence, the foresight. It was more terrifying than its physical strength. It hadn't just been a random, wild attack. It had been a planned hunt. It had been hurting us, trapping us. There was no choice. The road was our only way out. It was 12 miles of rough gravel and another 5 of paved county road to reach the nearest highway with any real traffic. I checked on Jake. His breathing was getting weaker. I did what little I could with the med kit, but I knew it was hopeless. He needed surgeons, not bandages. I got Brian on his feet. "We walk," I said. And so we did. We started the long, slow march down that gravel road, leaving our camp, our gear, and the body of a brave man behind us in a valley that was now a tomb. Jake died somewhere around the 4th mile. I felt the last, shallow breath leave his body. I carried him for another mile before I couldn't anymore. I laid him gently on the side of the road, closed his eyes, and said the only prayer I could think of. Then we kept walking, 2 broken men leaving a trail of ghosts behind them. We finally stumbled onto the paved road as the sun was setting. We were a horrific sight, caked in mud, blood, and dirt, our clothes torn. Brian was practically catatonic. I was running on fumes, my body screaming, my mind a maelstrom of shock and grief. A pickup truck eventually came down the road, an old farmer who took one look at us and immediately called 911 on his cell phone. The sheriff's deputies and the ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. The world of flashing lights and concerned, professional faces felt like a different planet. In the back of the ambulance, and later at the sheriff's office in Mount Ida, I told them everything. I told them about the silence, the smashed camera, the footsteps. I described the creature in precise, unvarnished detail. The height, the fur, the canine head, the intelligent eyes, the backward jointed legs. I told them how it bent Brian's rifle, how it threw Jake, how it killed Corey. I told them how I shot it and how it had disabled my truck. I recounted the events as clearly and factually as I could, just like I would have delivered an after-action report in the Army. They listened, they took notes, and they looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They saw a man suffering from extreme trauma, babbling about a monster. They separated me and Brian. His story, in his state of shock, was a jumbled mess of screaming and bears and monsters. They found Corey's body and later Jake's. They sent a team to the campsite. They found the abandoned gear, the bent rifle, the smashed stove. The official report came out 3 weeks later. The Polk County Sheriff's Department, in conjunction with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, concluded that Corey and Jake were the victims of an attack by an unusually large and aggressive black bear. My detailed description of the creature was dismissed as a trauma-induced confabulation. Brian's testimony was deemed unreliable. My story about shooting the creature was contradicted by the fact that they found no blood trail, no body, and only my own spent .308 casings. The bent rifle was a curiosity, noted as unexplained damage, with a theory that the bear might have stepped on it in just the right way. The slashed tires on my truck were officially attributed to an unrelated act of vandalism. My outfitter's license was suspended indefinitely, pending a mandatory psychological evaluation. The case was closed. I was publicly discredited. Privately, I was told I was lucky I wasn't being charged with negligent homicide for leading my clients into a situation with a known problem bear. They created a neat, tidy story that fit their understanding of the world. A tragic but explainable animal attack. My truth was inconvenient, so they buried it. A couple of months passed. I was in a downward spiral. I couldn't sleep. When I did, I saw Corey's death. I saw Jake hitting that tree. I saw that single burning amber eye promising retribution. I was drinking too much. My business was gone. My reputation was ruined. I was sitting in a small diner off Highway 270, staring into a cup of coffee I didn't want, when an old man in a faded game and fish warden uniform slid into the booth opposite me. He was weathered, his face a road map of wrinkles, his hands gnarled. He looked like he was part of the landscape. "You're Daniel Carter," he said. It wasn't a question. I just nodded. He ordered a coffee from the waitress. We sat in silence for a minute.
I read your report, he said finally, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. The official one. And I read the preliminary statement you gave Deputy Miller, the one they lost. He took a slow sip of his coffee. I'm retiring next month. Been working these woods for 42 years. Seen a lot. Heard more. He looked out the window at the mountains, dark and brooding in the distance. There are holes in the map. Places people go and don't come back from. Every few years there's a story. A hunter vanishes. A campsite is found torn to shreds, but nothing is stolen. We find tracks sometimes. Big tracks. They look like a bear, kinda, but the stride is too long. And sometimes they just disappear. Like whatever made 'em just vanished into thin air. He looked back at me, his eyes clear and serious. You're not crazy, son. I don't know what you saw up in that valley, but I believe you saw something. The brass,
The politicians, they don't want things they can't explain. It's bad for tourism. He finished his coffee and stood up, putting a few dollars on the table. My advice to you? Let it go. And stay out of the deep woods. There are things in there older than any government, older than any map. Some doors are best left unopened. And the thing you shot, it got a good look at you. It won't forget your face. He gave me a final, somber nod and walked out of the diner, leaving me alone with the confirmation I had desperately needed and the chilling warning that came with it. That was 3 years ago. I live in Little Rock now. I sold my house near the forest. I can't stand the quiet anymore. I need the sound of traffic and sirens to drown out the memory of that unnatural silence. I work a warehouse job, moving boxes under fluorescent lights. The confident, capable man who led expeditions into the wild is gone.
In his place is a haunted man who jumps at shadows and checks the locks on his doors 3 times before he can even think about sleeping. The nightmares are relentless. Sometimes it's the attack itself, replayed in perfect, bloody detail. Other times it's just the eye. That single, intelligent eye watching me from the dark corner of my room. I carry the guilt of Corey and Jake every single day. Corey died because he was a warrior, standing his ground. Jake died because he was an innocent man in the wrong place at the wrong time. I survived. Sometimes I wish I hadn't. Brian went through extensive therapy. He eventually came to accept the official story. He tells people he survived a horrific bear attack and that his traumatized mind invented a monster to cope. He's written a book about it. He's a professional victim now. It's easier for him. It's easier for everyone to believe the lie.
I've spent countless nights on the internet, falling down rabbit holes of forums and websites dedicated to cryptozoology. I've read hundreds of stories just like mine. Dogman, werewolf, skinwalker. The names are different, but the descriptions are terrifyingly consistent. Bipedal canids, unnatural speed and strength, malevolent intelligence. And every story ends the same way, with dismissal, ridicule, and a survivor left isolated with a terrible, unbelievable truth. I'm telling this story now, not because I expect you to believe me. I don't really care if you do. I'm telling it because the truth deserves to be heard. I'm telling it for Corey, who fought with a courage I have never seen before or since. I'm telling it for Jake, who just wanted to see the stars away from the city lights. Their lives mattered, and the thing that took them is still out there. That old warden was right. It knows my face. It knows my scent.
And some nights, when the city is quiet and the wind howls just right, I feel like it's looking for me. So, listen to my warning. The world is not the safe, well-lit place you think it is. The maps are wrong. There are still dark places where ancient things hold sway. Don't go looking for them. Don't dismiss the local legends as folklore. Don't ignore that feeling at the back of your neck when the woods go silent. Your rational mind will try to find an explanation, a comfortable lie to protect itself. Don't let it. Trust the fear. The fear is real. Turn around. Go back to your car. Lock your doors. Because if you push on, if you ignore the signs, you might come face to face with the truth. And the truth is a monster with the head of a wolf and the eyes of a devil. And it is hungry.